Okay, so this video is entitled The Fatal Five, because what we're looking at are the 5 fatal factors that finally brought down Cardinal Wolsey in 1529. We're going to look at each one of these factors in more detail, but first of all, let's outline what they were. Well, number 1 was the annulment, or the divorce. Number 2 was Wolsey's very own personality and his background. Number 3 was the failure of Wolsey's foreign policy. Number 4 was the Boleyn faction at court. And number 5, finally, was Henry's decision itself. These are the 5 fatal factors that we need to worry about that finally brought down Cardinal Wolsey. So let's look at these in a bit more detail, starting off with one of the main ones, the annulment. So one of the first key features or key factors that brought down Cardinal Wolsey in 1530 is his failure to have the marriage between Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon annulled. Henry really wanted this to happen because of 2 reasons. One, he'd already fallen in love with Anne Boleyn in the 1520s. So from the mid-1520s onwards, Henry is already in love with and probably already sleeping with Anne Boleyn. He needs an annulment to declare his marriage with Catherine of Aragon, his current wife, void, so that he is free to marry Anne Boleyn because he's in love with her. But more than this, Henry really desires a son. He needs a son, or he feels like he needs a son, to take over the crown when he dies. He needs an heir. Unfortunately, his wife, Catherine of Aragon, is advancing in years, although we wouldn't think so today, and she is probably not able to bear Henry any more children. So he's losing faith in being able to have a son with Catherine of Aragon. So he falls in love with Anne at court and realises that the younger woman is a better chance for him to have a son and therefore an heir for the Tudor crown. So he wants Wolsey to work hard to achieve an annulment of his marriage with Catherine of Aragon. And the 2 of them, Wolsey and Henry, in the mid-1520s, are fairly confident that the Pope, the person who has the final decision on this annulment, is going to grant it. They're fairly confident this is going to happen. However, after a couple of years and lots of hard work, it soon becomes evident that in fact this is not going to happen for a variety of reasons. So let's look at why the annulment failed and how this eventually became one of the key reasons that would bring Wolsey down in years to come. So it was really important for Henry that his future marriage to Anne Boleyn, as he saw it, was recognised and legal, because this meant that any children that they had would be recognised as legitimate. They would be legitimate princes and princesses. This would allow Henry and the English crown to have these children married off to the children of foreign empires and foreign royal dynasties. This would make it much easier for England, the English kingdom, in future generations to form alliances around Europe. So it was really important for Henry that his break away from Catherine of Aragon and his marriage to Anne Boleyn was legal and legitimate, so that any future children would also be seen as legitimate and respected in European royal circles. So it was really important for Henry to have this annulment. But there's some really key reasons why it was not granted by the Pope. So in 1529, Cardinal Campeggio, one of the Pope's cardinals, one of the Catholic cardinals, comes to England to look into the matter of Henry and Catherine's annulment, the annulment of their marriage. By July 1529, the case itself had been recalled to Rome, which basically killed it dead. It meant that there would be no annulment. So by July 1529, it was obvious to Wolsey and to Henry that they would not get the annulment that they desired. Why was this? Well, there's a number of reasons why the Pope at the time, Pope Clement, was reluctant to annul the marriage. First and foremost among these is that he did not want to go against what the previous Pope had said in allowing Henry to marry Catherine in the first place. The previous Pope had allowed Henry to marry Catherine, giving them a special dispensation. This is because Catherine had been Henry's brother's wife. Henry's brother had died and Henry had married his wife, Catherine. This was not entirely unusual, but it was slightly unusual, and it required a dispensation, special permission from the Catholic Church for it to go ahead. The previous Pope Julius had given them that permission. So now, with Henry looking for an annulment of that marriage, the new Pope, Pope Clement, did not want to go against what the previous Pope had said and declare the marriage invalid. That would be the wrong thing to do for a Pope. It was basically saying that a Pope was fallible, and in those days The Pope was seen as infallible. This meant that their word could not be challenged. Everything they said was correct because it came direct from God, if you like. The second reason why the Pope was not keen to grant the annulment is because he was controlled by Charles V. He was influenced heavily by Charles V. Charles V, the Holy Roman Empire, had invaded Italy, parts of Italy, and he had direct influence on the Pope and on the Catholic Church. Don't forget that Catherine of Aragon is Charles V's auntie. Henry VIII is married to Charles V's auntie. So if Charles V is influencing the Pope and the Catholic Church, he's not going to be particularly happy about the English king divorcing his own auntie and making him look and humiliating the Holy Roman Empire. He's not going to allow that to happen. And there's one further reason why. So Charles V was not keen to help Henry VIII because the two kingdoms were no longer allies. Henry had failed to support Charles in his wars with the French, and so Charles was in no mood to be helping the King of England. Why would he do that? It's his auntie, and Henry hasn't really helped him out. And finally, Catherine of Aragon herself. She had conducted the whole Surrey saga with great dignity, and in her public speeches, she had gained a lot of sympathy, both from people in the court, from other people in Europe, and from the Pope himself and from Campeggio. They had a lot of sympathy for Catherine, and so they were not really inclined to annul the marriage under these circumstances. So these are the reasons why the Pope did not give the annulment. However, it's Wolsey himself that takes the blame. Henry's got to find someone to blame, and it sure as hell isn't going to be himself, so all the blame rests on Wolsey's shoulders. This is the first fatal factor that begins to bring him down, the slow decline of his career under Henry VIII. So let's look at the second factor. We're going to look at the failure of Wolsey's foreign policies. What was it that he was doing abroad that also helped to bring him down in the end? So one key aspect of Wolsey's foreign policy failures was the treaties with Charles V. In 1521, Wolsey and Henry signed a treaty with Charles V to form an alliance against the French kingdom. In 1523, finally, an English army was ready to invade France, but by then it was too late. Charles V was already very disappointed in his new ally. In 1525, Henry VIII gets another army again and attempts another invasion of France. But by this time, Charles V had washed his hands of the alliance and he was not prepared to help Henry, so the alliance itself had broken down within 4 years. A really serious foreign policy failure for Wolsey, and another one of these contributing factors. So by 1525, Charles V's Holy Roman Empire was the most dominant empire in Europe, the most powerful empire. In 1527, England and France themselves form an alliance and declare war on the Holy Roman Empire, a strange change of events. So, by the time the annulment comes around, Charles V and Henry are enemies, no longer allies. Therefore, Charles V is not going to help with the annulment. So you can see now how the foreign policy failures, the failure of these alliances, links into the annulment itself. They all play a part together. So to summarise it really quickly, we can think of it like this. Charles V and the Holy Roman Empire had taken control of Europe, or vast parts of Europe, and the Pope by 1527. Henry and Wolsey need, therefore, Charles's support to get an annulment. Charles is not going to give them that support because Henry had failed to help Charles during his wars with the French. He'd broken the alliances. This is how these two factors link together and both help to bring down Cardinal Wolsey in the end. It's really important that we remember the way these factors fit together and don't view them as individual factors.